Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching Teal Swan's video titled Teal Swan's Stance on Suicide. Let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. I just want to say from the beginning that I know a lot of people have been helped by her, so I'm not here to denigrate her or anyone that has benefited from her. It's clear that she is doing a lot of good in the world and a lot of people are being helped by her, but there are some things that she is saying and possibly doing with her followers that needs to be commented on. So let's watch.
It also scares me because of how backward the mental health field is at this current time. We cannot forget that at one point in time, and it was a very long period of time, that what medical students were taught was to bloodlet, to try to resolve illness. We now know that this killed people, lots and lots of people. It just never occurs to us that we, in this day and age, might actually be educating medical students, psychologists, and psychiatrists the same level of damaging methodology.
My goodness. Talk about a straw man. There are better examples that she could actually give. There's a lot of research demonstrating that a portion of people in my field are ineffective and maybe even harmful when they are treating people with suicidal thoughts. So you don't have to point to bloodletting. And again, that's in the medical field. It's not in the psychological field. But this is just a classic. I've been mildly following these sorts of individuals for many years, mostly passively, but maybe I should get into it more as a podcaster and YouTube person, content provider, that it's a classic thing because most people don't have access to experts like me, either professionally or even in their personal life. And even people in my personal life, it's not like they ask me questions about this sort of thing. So there are people close to me. I mean, even my wife, I'm guessing the things that I'm saying right now, she probably didn't even know I knew this stuff, you know what I mean? Because why would it come up over dinner or something? So most people are walking around with very limited knowledge about what we know as experts. And so what she's saying plays into a common myth or a misunderstanding or just lack of access to information, which is a problem for sure. And I'm guessing for a lot of people, this argument really resonates with them. It's just like, yeah, that's true. You know, there's a lot of stigma about people in my field, people coming to therapy. And I think she's playing into that. I think she might even attract people who are, you know, steered away from therapy even before seeing a therapist because of stigma. And she seems more relatable. She's on YouTube, this sort of thing. Anyway, so what she's saying is that bloodletting that was done for many, many years, which is true. It's shocking. We tend to think about bloodletting as something that happened in like the 1700s. It happened in the last century. Bloodletting in Western society was still being used as a method for treating various different medical conditions, I think up until the 1940s or 50s, don't quote me on that, but it was going on for a long time. And it is ridiculous in its nature. It's not helpful. There are some conditions where reducing blood volume, and I'm not a medical person, but I have looked into this in terms of the history of this sort of thing, where it might be able to help, but for the vast majority of people, it either had no effect or made things drastically worse, right? So essentially what she's saying, which is obvious, because people in the medical field, and I guess by extension in psychology, that in the distant past, there was a practice that was unscientific, unsupported by evidence, that was harmful to people, that means that everything we do today is invalid and potentially harmful, I suppose. And this is a common trope of people that have something that is outside of science, is outside of empirical evidence. They will point to something like, scientists used to think that the world was flat, and so therefore all scientists are idiots. Scientists, psychologists included, what we do is we actually look at the evidence. And when we look at the evidence, we will shed our past beliefs, like bloodletting, because it is demonstrated it is not helpful or it is harmful. So everything that we do and teach is based on that science. It's based on that empirical evidence. And it's constantly evolving because we're getting more and more information. But to compare what I am doing, because she's talking about me, to compare what I'm doing with bloodletting is, like I said earlier, it's wrong, it's deceptive, it's hurtful, and it could steer people away from science-based help. Now, as I've been saying, are there some people in my field who were taught on the scientific methods and the research who are harming people? Yeah, it happens. Does that mean we throw the whole thing out because some people are not following the science or they misinterpreted it? I don't think so. Also, can someone help who isn't using a scientifically based method? It's possible, but as I've been saying from the beginning, what she is talking about is things that we have found to be scientifically helpful. So now, I don't know how she's using it, but the principles that she's saying have been established as mainstream methods and ways of thinking within my field for decades. Not everything she's saying, but many of the things that she is saying.
This scares me because what it means...
And might she be helping people? Absolutely. She might be. I know she has helped many people. It's anecdotal, though. We'd have to study. That's what we do in my field. We actually look at data and we take people who have an issue, like take 1,000 people who have depression. We take 300 of them and you don't put them in any treatment. You put 300 of them and you put them in some kind of general treatments, just like supportive listening help. And then you put 400 into the treatment group where you do CBT or psychodynamic therapy. And then you compare the success rates. And what we find is that our models are more effective than general support and better than not doing anything at all. And so that's what we do. Does she study herself? Does she have... Now, I've actually heard that in the podcast, I believe that she was running some kind of what she called clinical trial, but then we heard from the journalist that it wasn't a clinical trial, it was case studies, which is fine, that's research, but case studies don't demonstrate effectiveness because you're taking cases and you're asking people, did this work? And it would be very easy to find cases in which it was successful and then you publish that research. It doesn't demonstrate effectiveness versus other forms of treatment, of course. But might we, if we looked at her model and actually gathered those data, find that she is effective to a certain extent, maybe even just as effective as people in my field? It could be. And there's some evidence, at least preliminary evidence, that might even be the case. So I'm not saying that her model is bad. I'm just saying the things that she's saying is irresponsible because it's going to steer people away from getting treatment. If she was the only person on the planet that could help people with these issues, then we would be completely up craps creek because there's literally millions and millions of people around the world speaking various languages, living in various different communities with the problems that she professes to be the only person who can treat.
Is that all spiritual teachers, all self-help experts, all people who have found amazing cures themselves and want to tell people the answer that worked for them, are now going to be in trouble for sharing their opinion.
No, she keeps saying this, that for sharing your opinion, you're going to be in trouble. For talking about emotions, you're going to be in trouble. No, absolutely not. Teal Swan, you can offer your opinion. You can talk about your experiences. You can talk about emotions. You cannot provide treatment. We understand we want that in our society, right? We don't want people... I've been over this.
For sharing their perspective. And to be quite honest, many of them have cures that work much better than what is accepted in mainstream psychology.
No, not demonstrated. We've studied that. We look at it. We study that. Because if there was an outside treatment mode that actually was better or even as effective as what we're doing, we would want to know that because we would want to incorporate that. And that's what we have done for the past 100 years. Every method that we have was originally an outside method, And so all the methods that we use, and there are many methods that we use, have been introduced from the outside, had initial skeptical people. This is going way back to the late 1800s. And then we actually study it, look at it and say, there might be some truth to that. And then we start to incorporate it into our treatment, into our options, into our trainings. So that statement right there is, I guess, possibly true, but where's the data?
Or mainstream medical science. On top of this, it means that these people who have a genuine calling towards sharing this information will now be without the ability to fulfill their purpose, to do the very important things they have to do on this planet.
Great. If she considers it her purpose to raise awareness, to even talk to people within reason, meaning she's not providing clinical treatment, but she wants to help people who have suicidal thoughts. She wants to talk about awareness. She wants to share her perspective and her opinions. I applaud her. More people need to do that. I just wish she would say something in this section right now, just like, there's a line that I won't cross because I'm not a trained clinician. This is where the line is for me, and I don't cross that line because I'm not a god.
Imagine telling the Dalai Lama or Socrates or Eckhart Tolle or Anthony Robbins that they can't talk about depression. It's not legal for them to do so. And that if they do talk about depression, they could get fined for practicing therapy without a license.
No. Anyone can talk about depression. You can't treat depression because you aren't qualified to treat depression. Again, do we want randos? So according to her, literally anyone can treat depression. That's not what she's saying, but I think that's what she's trying to convince the audience. And, I look in the comments and no one's pointing this out. So her followers are, I'm guessing, completely just buying this hook, line, and sinker because it plays into a lot of misconceptions. She can talk about depression. She can share her opinions. Absolutely. Please do. Please, more awareness. I've been podcasting and yammering about these various things for years and years, trying to raise awareness. I'm not treating people on YouTube, of course. I frequently will say that, but I'm trying to raise awareness. And yes, please talk about it.
On top of this, to be quite honest with you, it is a terrifying world that we live in today. If somebody has overcome suicidality and is saying that they can actually share their perspective on what actually did work, and people say we're not interested in what you have to say about that because you're not a psychologist.
Again, total straw man. And what a straw man is when someone is trying to convince people, they're trying to influence people, trying to use propaganda, they will paint a picture or create a straw man of the enemy or the other side or the opposition that is false. It's like when people who hate Muslims, and they'll just be like, well, Muslims, they're all terrorists. That's why we shouldn't allow them into our country. Well, Mexicans, they're all criminals and drug dealers. That's why we shouldn't let them in our country, and you need to pay me to put up this big wall. That's a straw man. It's false. It's propaganda, and it plays into people's biases. And so if you prop that up and you say, you're trying to influence, you're trying to get people to do this, like you notice for me, I will never and have never and am not saying I'm the only one who can do this. I'm not even saying she can't do this. I'm saying it's possible she is helping people. In fact, like I've been saying, I know she has helped a lot of people, but particularly in my field, I am not the only one. There are thousands of people in my field around the world that do what I do, essentially, and many of them probably do it better than I do. I don't know. What she is basically saying is take everyone who has been trained, the entire field, everyone around the world, regardless of what culture they come from, if they're trained in psychology and psychiatry, social work, psychotherapy, they are discounted because of these sorts of things. And I'm being attacked because I'm talking about suicide, which I don't know if that's true. I don't know why she's being attacked, but I know she is being attacked because people are claiming, and I think rightfully so to some extent, that she is treating without a license conditions that she's not qualified to treat. Now, you can argue with the license. You can try to pass a law. You can lobby. You can march and say, we need to get rid of this license, or we need to open up change the law. But that's not what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is I want to break the law or something. I don't know. And I think, and this is just me speculating, that she's trying to defend herself in her thing because she wants more followers. And so I watched the documentary, I listened to the podcast. I have this, I don't know, maybe it's the supervisor in me. I have this desire, this impulse or something, because I've worked with other people like this, where I just want to tell her, you might be doing some really wonderful things, and clearly people really like your approach, and you might even be saving people's lives. People will attest to that, and that's great. How about you get rid of the other things that are causing problems for you, like the treatment of people and their conditions? You could say, look, I talk with people about their problems. I don't treat their problems. And when I identify that, I tell them they need to, or I work alongside. I have life coaches that work alongside with me. Life coaches are not licensed. They are essentially unregulated helpers with potentially no qualifications. Some are basically completely unqualified and harmful, and some are extremely helpful. I work alongside with people like that. They do their thing and I do my thing, and we talk, and in fact, there's this one life coach in Seattle that referred many, many clients to me over the years, and I've referred people to him. So she could do that, right? She could work alongside people like me. She doesn't have to vilify us and steer everyone away from us towards her. She could be huge. She could avoid all of the need for defensiveness if she just let go of these falsehoods.
I am in a very difficult position teaching about suicide as a spiritual leader and as a survivor of suicidality myself, because my perspective differs immensely from the mainstream psychology community.
No, I've been over that. It doesn't. A lot, if not all, of her perspective has already been discussed and researched and used and taught. Now, are there therapists and other people in my field who haven't had access to those methods and philosophies? Yeah. But nothing she is talking about thus far, and what I know about her treatment, is unique to her and counter to anything that we do. Now, I don't know everything that she does. I've heard that in the more distant past, she had some pretty wild approaches to suicide prevention and exploration. So I don't know what those are yet. I think I've heard people refer to them. So I don't want to say that people in my field are doing things like that. But I think in terms of how she's adjusted over the years to sort of shed those more controversial methods, I think she's actually becoming more and more like a typical therapist who is in my field. But I don't know about that. I'm going to further investigate that as I go along.
This focus that people in the media have put on me in relation to suicidality has painted the exact opposite picture of what is the reality about me and my stance on suicide. They don't interview the abundance of people who say that their lives were saved by my perspectives and by my stance on suicide, and specifically by the video that I did on what to do if you're suicidal.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. She's not alone. Many people who aren't clinicians are online speaking up about suicide and literally saving people's lives, according to the people whose lives were saved, because it's almost never talked about in our society. And as I've been over, many in my field are phobic about talking about it and are undertrained. It's a huge problem. I mean, you just have to assume that in mental health treatment and education and licensure, that competency in suicidal knowledge and treatment and prevention would be mandatory, right? It'd just be standard, it'd be like one of the first things that you're super expert about in, after going to graduate school. And it's just not. It's because I would propose, and as she was alluding to earlier, that we have a fear about death and suicide. It's taboo and it's ridiculous. So, but yeah, what she's talking about is that a lot of people are attacking her without actually looking at some of the data, at least the anecdotal data. And I would agree with that. There are people who don't know her, who are criticizing her and just writing her off as a cult leader, as someone that is practicing without a license, and she's harming all these people. And that may not be true. And there's indications, at least anecdotally, case study wise, that yes, maybe a good portion, if not the majority of people who actually come to her to get help regarding suicide specifically, that she has helped them tremendously and literally saved people's lives. So to just write her off and say that everything she's doing is wrong and crazy is, it's misguided, and she's right to be upset about that. I just wish she had a better defense than to say that she's the only one.
They never speak to or speak about the psychologists and psychiatrists who support what I'm doing, who flock to my trainings to learn these new methods, because they agree with me. Also because they see what I'm doing as the next step forward for the mental health field.
Okay, the first part, I'm like, yeah, that's a good, and people who attack her will fail to recognize or won't mention that people in my field, actually some like her. I would venture to say that I'd say the vast majority don't even know who she is. I didn't know who she was until a couple weeks ago when everyone started to email me because the documentary came out. I'd never heard of her, never seen her. But I imagine that most people in my field are not into her thing. I don't know that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing about her. I'm just saying that I've known thousands of therapists and psychologists, and the way that she talks is typical to a sizable minority of people in my field, but it's not the majority. Most people aren't really in this kind of camp, but it is a camp. And the camp that she's in is humanistic psychology, which was established in the 50s, 60s, 70s, came to prominence in the 70s and 80s. And a lot of the things she's doing, in fact, if not everything she's doing, is completely within the humanistic tradition. Satir, Whitaker, experiential therapies, Gestalt, Fritz Perls, internal family systems, primal scream therapy. John Lennon did that actually in the early 70s as a famous example of primal parts work, role play, drama therapy traditions that go back. I think the MRI Institute, Milan Institute actually did some of this stuff. The thing that she's doing it has been well established and well researched and taught, and we have moved away from that in recent years and more towards CBT, which is cognitive therapy is great. I use it all the time. Behavioral therapy is obvious and also very useful, and I use it all the time. But a lot of people are heading more towards CBT because the CBT propaganda machine is a lot stronger, or the lobbying machine is a lot stronger than other schools like psychodynamic and humanistic, to name two. And I'm seeing a trend towards CBT that it's not a bad thing, but it discounts a lot of other opportunities and also denies clients a wide range of clinicians that they can go to. Incidentally, for me, I'm a theory nerd and have been my entire career and have incorporated all the major theories because I like them all. They're all useful given different scenarios. I mean, solution-focused neurology, feminism, cultural studies, systems theory, obviously, there's a whole slew of things that all have their use, and I try to incorporate everything: cognitive therapy, behavioral therapy. Anyway, so she's saying that this is the next step forward. If anything, it's a step backwards, not in a bad way. I mean, maybe what her followers are saying is that humanistic psychology is coming back in style, and parts work and experiential therapies are coming back in style. I mean, they're being used. I use a lot of the things that I saw in the documentary where they would, according to them, it's a spirit from the afterlife that is, possessing someone. Like one person, their mother had died, I believed, and one of the other classmates said, "I will channel your mother and talk with you," and it's this really intense experience. Take away the supernatural stuff, and what you have is role playing. We've been doing that for forever, and I still do. I do it in my practice. I do it with my students. And I don't just do it with clients. I do it with, when I'm teaching people about things. And it can be a very powerful experience, extremely powerful, as you can see in the documentary. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.